What does good mean to you, though?
When I think about good, I think about the inner journey, my inner journey, and the inner journey we facilitate for all our clients. We're mainly female, but we certainly do some culture and leadership work with all genders. So how do we support that so that people can be connected to a higher purpose, so they can have a sense of good they're contributing?
Welcome to Chasing Good, a circle group podcast with the aim to help us better understand the good that's happening in the world today. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy. On today's episode of Chasing Good, we speak with Fiona Pearman. Fiona is the co-founder of the Quantum Impact Group and co-author of the book Core Confidence. Through Quantum Impact Group, Fiona's work elevates women of all walks of life, increases the pipeline of female talent, and creates inclusive workplaces. Fiona is making some incredible impact with the work that she's doing, helping people see their value and lead with confidence. We're absolutely stoked to have her with us today, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello and welcome back to Chasing Good. Here with me today, I have Fiona Pearman. Fiona, thank you so much for joining us.
Michael, it's really wonderful to be here, and I love the premise of your show, wanting to engage more in some of the good in the world, some of the great things that are going on.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And it's we've got quite a lot to cover off today because you are doing quite a lot of that in the world with a few of the different things that you've been working on over the years and do every day. We want to talk about the Quantum Impact Group. We want to talk about core confidence. But can we start with, if possible, what has gotten you to this point? Can you give us a little bit of context, just so the audience knows a little bit about yourself and what's got you here today?
Yeah, thanks. Where it started for me from a working point of view is I ended up working for large corporate organisations, global organisations. I was fortunate to have some roles which meant I got to travel a lot, got to learn a lot. I was working at the time in marketing and corporate brand strategy, and I loved that. And it felt exciting and interesting as a late 20s, early 30s person. And from there, I became curious about culture and leadership. And I really started to understand that if we wanted to deliver on brand purpose, if we wanted to be organisations striving to do good in the world as well, then we needed to understand the people who were part of that. And we needed to support them to step into their greatness, to actually achieve the things that the organisations were saying were important. And it was that work that really led me to my co-founder in Quantum Impact Group, Kate Bora. She also is ex-corporate, more from a financial and accounting side of things. And we both landed in the place of culture and leadership. And in particular, we're noticing that women were not advancing at the same rate as men into those senior decision-making tables. And we were curious about that. It was work that kind of found us. We didn't sort of set out to do it, but it kept coming back. And we would often be in workshops where we'd be talking to women, and they would start to unpack some of the things that were going on, some of the reasons they felt, some of the barriers that were precluding them from getting to the level that they kind of knew they were capable of, but they weren't achieving those goals. And every time we unpacked that, it came back to this issue of confidence. It didn't matter if we started out, I'm scared to speak up, or I'm scared to get it wrong, or I'm worried what other people will think, or all of the stories that were going on. Underneath it all was actually a lack of connection to what we'd call core confidence, or might more generically be called rock-grounded confidence. And as we realised how ubiquitous that was, it was really something that was such a common experience for so many women, we started to do some research. And the research and our experience of working with women and organisations resulted in the book Core Confidence. So we published that in 2018, and it was really at that point it became clear to me that this was going to be, certainly for the latter part of my career, my life's work. At the time, we were sitting around my kitchen table with our researcher, and we had all the data in front of us. We had everything. And I'd actually thought we'd gone further with gender equity. I thought it was a bit better than the stats said. And when you started to see on a global level how much further we had to go, it was a really sobering moment. And at the time I had a 15-year-old daughter, and I thought, I'm telling her this is a great world full of equal opportunities for you, and my son and other people out there, and it's just not true. And so that really, I think, galvanized me in being focused around this work. And for Kate and I, as we'd done the research, we started to understand that when we have more women at senior decision-making tables, they tend to employ more diverse cohorts of people. So we have more diversity throughout our organisations. They make great decisions or contribute to great decisions around risk and profitability. So they actually enhance financial performance of organisations. And they're also tend to be quite oriented towards things that are good for the planet, good for the environment, and make good choices around that or contribute to those good choices. So when you layer all those things in together, it feels as though this work is very purposeful and as though it is worthwhile to make sure that we have good representation of women at every layer.
It is such a multifaceted issue with so many different layers and so many different contexts, and it's so important to be working on. So kudos for all that you've done so far and all that you continue to do. So to give everybody context, Fiona and I were introduced through Women in Technology, for which Fiona and Kate both do some incredible work with, in partnership with the group of Women in Technology there. And we've recently been a part of some kind of round tables that you've run with regards to kind of deep diving into the solutions that we can work towards within with the gender equality and gender equity, particularly with particularly in relation to the pay gap that with some of that recent data that's come through. I'd love to understand a little bit more about the problem from your perspective, I suppose, so we can really kind of talk to the different areas of the different areas of the solutions that you've been kind of working on. Can you give us a little bit more context in that?
Look, I think it's really important to take a layered approach to this, to understand that this is a complex systemic problem. It is not as though there is one way in which we can solve this, and it is going to take a lot of different interventions and different initiatives at different layers of society and community to address the current state of play. And I think, look, there are some good things underway. Absolutely, what's been happening at a government level, certainly the Women's Task Force and the report they delivered at the end of last year talks a lot about the ways in which there is a big role for government to play here. I think organisations have a huge role to play, and it's been interesting, WGEA publishing that data for the first time. We've certainly been encouraging organisations not to feel slammed by that or see it as a negative, but see it as an opportunity to really engage in some conversations that potentially they weren't having, to start to get better at comms around this, start to educate and inform your people and your stakeholders around what you're doing, what you can do, your milestones, how you're going. There's a big piece for organisations to do here. And what we know, these issues are, they're structural, they're systemic. There's a whole lot of gender bias that goes on. KPMG did a really great deep dive around the causes of the lack of gender equity, particularly in the Australian market a couple of years ago. And that report identified 4 key factors, but the biggest one was 36% of the difference in the gender pay gap comes down to gender discrimination. It actually comes down to sexism, or the default that we automatically promote more men into senior roles. We automatically sometimes pay men more. Men have more access to bonuses. They have less interrupted careers. And again, it's not a simple linear piece here, and we don't want to be saying there's a right or wrong. More, how can we as humans engage with this problem and think about how we both are responsible for all the facets in life. I mean, we know once both parents are more involved in the unpaid work or the parenting or the shared care or that side of things, it makes a big difference to women's workforce participation. So these are, again, many different ways in which to engage in what is a gnarly issue. It's not a straightforward thing. So we're certainly encouraging of individuals, organisations, and more broadly society being willing to engage with this, be willing to start to unpack it, and in some cases be willing to look at our own bias that's going on.
Okay, incredible. And so let's talk about the confidence component then, as to what kind of solutions you guys have designed effectively, but have been kind of teaching and rolling out. And what's the goal with what you're teaching?
Look, I think, Michael, there's quite a big push that exists around stop fixing women. So saying that, the issue at stake is actually organisational, it's societal, it's social conditioning, it's, girls experience a certain amount of bias or rewards for certain behaviour from the time they're very small. So there's a whole lot of reasons and things that go on that mean we've got what we've got. And that's true, and we're absolutely passionate about, and I think we should be relentless in changing the system. The problem is that all the women who exist in the workforce today were raised in that very system. They got all that messaging, they got all that conditioning, all that neural pathways, all that wiring was laid down. And if we just say to them, well, we're just going to go over here and fix the system, systems are very, very slow to change. And if we don't resource those women who are already in the system to actually be able to counter those narratives, to start to reframe and to think about themselves differently, they haven't really got the tools and the ways in which to navigate what is quite difficult when your whole life you are rewarded for getting things right, for not failing, for doing things perfectly, for being quiet, for being accommodating, for pleasing. When you start to question that and support women to access this inner resource that we know all women have, and they start to experiment and shift and change, and they ask for what they want, and they say no and have boundaries, and they do things differently, they are catalysts for change in the system. They start to shift the dial, and they have agency and power to do that. And so that's why we think it's really important to have a very big "and" here, and encourage and resource women to do what we've seen countless times. When we've had hundreds of people through our program and thousands and thousands of women in our events and trainings, and they are going out and doing some extraordinary things as a result of really redefining and reframing how they interact with the world.
Well said, by the way. That was beautifully articulated. It's funny because I sit here with probably in the shoes of someone who's very fortunate. I've got some incredible female role models in my life. My mum, my sister, my wife, all highly educated and aware of their own value, and have helped teach me of such things. I sit here now as a soon-to-be father of a beautiful young girl soon.
Congratulations!
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, no, so which we are over the moon and super excited about. So, as a new father to be, what do I need to be avoiding for my daughter to turn into a woman with the confidence that she needs to live in the world?
Yeah, I think, Michael, the first thing I'd say is let's not be hard on ourselves. We already have so many rules and so many things we're trying to do. So I think I'd encourage young parents of all genders to just start to be really conscious. And I see this already, knowing you a little bit already and knowing how thoughtful you are about things. I think you will kind of naturally gravitate towards this. And I think it's just, we've got generations of defaults around gender norms about what little boys and little girls do and how they should and shouldn't play and how they should and shouldn't interact. And our expectations often drive behaviour. And so I think it's great to challenge ourselves, when we see a little boy engaging with dolls, to encourage and support that. When we see a little girl curious about, how machines work and how things are, maybe what we would have traditionally thought were more masculine things, encouraging and supporting that. When a girl is loud and boisterous, rewarding her for that, not asking people to be quiet. There's a lot schools have here, because schools, I think, have over-relied on girls leading the way and being quiet, which is not super helpful, and being quite tolerant of boys being rambunctious. So again, there's lots of little ways that we can just observe and notice some of the ways in which, and I think sometimes grandparents can be a good indicator here. And again, not to make them wrong, they do what they do for very good reason, but just to maybe subtly and kindly point out that, actually these things are available to all of us as humans. They don't belong for one particular gender or other.
There's a lot to think about there. And it's fascinating that you brought up the education piece too, because, the education, we can fall down quite a significant rabbit hole with regards to the education system here. But I am interested to hear your thoughts on that as a whole. If you look at a lot of people would argue that the current education system was simply created to make factory workers per se, and that's not just a lot of people. I suppose that's quite well recorded in many facets, not necessarily holistically and not necessarily the truth. But how have you seen that impact women?
I think the education system, particularly the public education system, is doing the very best they can with very limited resources, and I think it's hard. And I think, I have a stepdaughter who works in education, and the demands by parents, have grown significantly. We want, everything for our little person, and so there's a lot on their plate. I do think we are at an interesting point where we could question some of the thinking about education and be more willing to be gender neutral, and be more human-centered around the way in which we encourage people or little humans to do things, or discourage them from doing things. So I do think there's a role that primary schools have. But if I was talking more broadly about education systems, my big thing would be single-sex schools. I think they are one of the biggest barriers to us creating a gender-equal society. And I understand, there's some history and there's some loyalty to that structure, but I don't think it is conducive. And we can see, all of the work by Chanel Contos around consent, and the recent expose of a, very prestigious school in Sydney. There's just a lot of ingrained gender norms, stereotypes, sexism that gets perpetrated in those environments. And so we do need to think and question whether that's best for our sons and daughters. Is this what we want? Is that how we want to create the next generation of people coming through in the way in which we want them to do things? I think the other thing we observe that's interesting for single-sex girls' schools or women's education is teenage girls are pretty damn feisty. They know what they want. There's actually been a huge amount of resources pulled into giving them confidence over the last 15, 20 years. And actually, when they get to uni, they're already outstripping young men in terms of, acquiring degrees. They go into their first jobs, they're pretty strong and that sort of thing. What happens, interestingly, and this has been a constant in our work for the last 7 or 8 years, is they're gung-ho and they believe in themselves, and then they get to mid to late 20s, early 30s, and they look around and they look up and they look across and they start to engage with, they were told all the time it was all okay and, girl power and we can do all these things. And then they really slam into those systems and structures we've been talking about, and they start to see how easy and organic it is for young men to network and to go to the next level and to engage in things and how that happens almost without thinking, and they have to be part of mentor programs and all sorts of artificial structures, which are not necessarily bad. I'm not in any way saying they're bad, but they have to be brought around because they don't exist organically. And so this confidence crisis that happens around, late 20s, early 30s is really noticeable. And I think that's something that, in a way, the education system it's done good work to counter what was happening before, but we've almost set women up to expect something that's as yet doesn't exist in the workplace.
It would be one of the biggest, I suppose, counter arguments to the gender pay gap that I hear, I would say, is that of the maternity leave, which objectively has merit and logic to a degree. It doesn't dive deep enough though. So I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts around that, because that is something that I think we've been leaning a little bit too much on for too long, and some potential solutions that you think we could use to work around that, with regards to maternity leave and the structures that we see within society to prevent women from kind of elevating their careers after children.
Look, I think firstly I'm going to catch the term. I don't think we should use it. I think we should say parental leave. And I think it should be...
I couldn't agree more.
I think it should be gender neutral, and it should be encouraged and expected that all parents will take care of their children, regardless of gender. And I think that's a big thing to shift and change. We work in the finance sector and a number of different, and tech, and it is just so much the norm that men don't take parental leave, and they expect that their wives will or their partners will. And this leads to huge imbalance. So one of the fastest ways to shift some of the dynamics around women missing out is the use it or lose it parental leave, which the government is indicating that they're heading towards that way. It's still a fairly small amount, but there is pretty good evidence around the world that does work when people face the loss of income around not choosing to opt into parenting. That does seem to drive some behaviour change. But there's a societal and cultural piece around this too. We've got to expect, want, support, and encourage men to do their part here, because it's not fair on them either, quite frankly. I mean, all the men who do it go, oh my God, it would have been terrible to have not made that connection with my, daughter or son. It would have been awful not to have done it. And yet still a good 80-85% of men miss out because it's not the expected path. So I think there's a big piece there about sharing it's not just sharing the parenting part of things, it's sharing all forms of care, it's sharing mental and emotional load. When we have children, those children are going to be the consumers of tomorrow, the workers of tomorrow, the people who will who will be the economy. And the fact that women's financial security and careers should be severely compromised because they're the only carers, that just seems incredibly unfair to me, that we've kind of created it that way. And not only that men are missing out on what is such an important part for society. We know how rich and amazing it is for the children. My kids were fortunate enough. My husband's a bit older than me, so we did a baton change where I was a lead parent for a while, and then when my daughter was 4, he became the lead parent. So he was always the dad who was dropping off and picking up, doing the plats, helping out with things. When she was sick at school, they'd go, "I will call mum." She'd go, "No, you'll be calling dad." So just disrupting all of those norms, I think, is really healthy for us to start to see everyone as having a stake in this and everyone as benefiting from it. And when we do that, then more women will be able to take shorter parental leave. They'll be able to return to work in a way that works for them. And that's very much kind of the work we do in the Acts of Confidence program, is resourcing women so that they can have good quality conversations, so they can come back in, they can contribute with all of that experience and skill they had before in a way that works for them, in a way that works for the organisation. Have good conversations, be prepared to be creative, change things, let's try this for 6 months, see how it goes, let's check in, what's working, what's not working, let's try something else. All of those kind of experiments are really valuable as we navigate something that I don't think we've been particularly good at before.
Most certainly. And I I completely agree. I mean, for Circle Group, our policy, or parental leave policy, is 4 months parental leave for primary and secondary carers, because it is it's necessary for us to have the same amount of on ramps and off ramps for both men and women for their careers ongoing. It doesn't necessarily make it commercially easy, but I think that's just because we haven't necessarily been focusing on the right things. It's over the long term, I think that would well and truly pay in dividends, and it allows in short, I agree completely with what you're saying. So well said there. The piece you mentioned before about deciding that this was the thing that you were going to do for the rest of your life. I'm passionate. I'm curious. This is the kind of stuff that I find to be also quite interesting, because that's a pretty big thing to say. I've found the thing I want to do. It's almost like a bit of a eureka moment. Could you talk me through that?
Yeah. Like, I think I was very fortunate because I was already doing work that filled my cup and made a bit of a difference. Working in culture and leadership is something where you get to see, the results, people's self-awareness, and, choosing to show up differently and lead their teams differently and do that is worthwhile. And there are a lot of people who are really good at that. There are a lot of providers, a lot of experts who are excellent at that. And at the time that Kate and I were writing Core Confidence and we established Quantum Impact Group, we hadn't come across anyone who was doing the work quite like we do. And that's not to say there aren't lots of people doing good work with women in leadership, and we certainly support all efforts to raise women up. But what we'd found personally, and what we'd found in the workshops that we ran, is there was a lot going on beneath the surface, and it was really quite vulnerable. It was also quite painful for women to unpack and to start to understand the ways in which they'd either been conditioned or they'd fallen. It just become a default way of operating that was actually holding themselves back. And we're very clear not to blame them. There's a whole lot of factors that have led them to where they are. And we know the incredible shifts that are possible as a result of women being resourced to stand in their power. And we've witnessed women who've been in our programs leave domestic violence situations. We've witnessed women leave marriages where the marriage was a big source of undermining their confidence. We've seen women negotiate for what they're worth, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 more than they were being paid, which it's not just about the money, it's about how I feel about myself, about owning who I am and my value in the world and contributing that. We've seen women apply for and take on roles they would never have done before because they had a whole lot of rules and stories in their head about what they thought they could and couldn't do, what the roles would and wouldn't demand. And so to watch the impact of this work once women have a really strong connection to that core confidence, once they're operating from that place and seeing the impact they have in the world, that's what drives us to do what we do.
That feeling of the emotional connection that you get to have with these kind of individuals, super empowering and beautiful. But I almost feel like there would be a bit of pressure behind such a, creating that kind of expectation on yourself. Is that something that you carry? Do you kind of hold yourself to that?
I think we're very fortunate that being in partnership is a great richness to the way in which we hold things. So it's not as though any one individual has to hold this, we hold it together. And I think in that very holding of the group coaching that we do in the programs and the work we do, we support each other and create the container where the women in the community support each other. So it is not dependent on us only. It's dependent on the community that we've convened and created. And these women support each other. They are each other's best cheerleaders and accountability buddies. And they actually are integral to how the whole system functions and the results that we get. So it's an interesting question because I had never thought of it as pressure before. There's always pressure in life and in owning a business and all of those things. But never have I actually been conscious of pressure to deliver results with the work we do, because it happens. I think if you hold the integrity of the work, and coaching is very much about seeing potential in others before they can see it themselves. And so we believe in them. We can see what they're capable of before they can. They can see it of each other in the community. And it's that being in that, being held by that, that propels them to take action that they wouldn't have taken before, to do things that maybe feel a bit uncomfortable, but actually are the very thing that creates the life that they so desperately and so much desire and deserve.
Building a community is a very hard thing to do. And it's almost flippantly used these days because you know we've got social media and online communities and things like that, but not easy. Hard thing to do. Can you talk to me about the process that you've undertaken to build the community and also, I suppose, how you maintain it, nourish it, keep people engaged, and what kind do you have frameworks that you follow to make sure there's certain principles that the support that's being given within the community is the right kind of support too, not healthy support?
Look, I think I really want to honour Kate here. Kate Bora founded a community called Young Professional Women Australia, which is where some of our first experiments were, some of our first workshops, some of our learning, and that was actually an experiment really. And it was basically young women who said, we want to network, we want to engage, we don't want to do it in that more traditional way, we want to do something different. And so Kate's a great problem solver and very much an action person. And so she created something that started the ball rolling and led us to the work in Core Confidence and publishing the book, and then deciding to run the program Acts of Confidence, which is a Women in Leadership public program. And because we know the power of women working together and supporting each other, we facilitate that in a very conscious way. So we run a lot of free things. There's a lot of free webinars, training, workshops. You've shared some of our career accelerators with your community. We partner with women in groups. We love other communities of women and we engage wholeheartedly with them. We support them. We're very generous with what we give away. So all of that work, I think, is a great groundswell that's kind of the broader community, if you like. And then the people who opt in and choose to come in to the paid program, they're already kind of primed for the interaction and the connection, all of that sort of thing. And then because we live and breathe this, and because we're vulnerable, and because we know the power of the work, the space that's created is safe enough. We get this feedback all the time. It felt safe enough for me to do things that were out of my comfort zone. It felt safe enough for me to take actions I wouldn't have taken otherwise. It felt safe enough for me to have conversations I hadn't had before. And it's in that psychological safety of the community that people will do things that perhaps they wouldn't in other contexts. And they'll cheer each other on. They'll encourage each other to do things. There's a famous saying about, if you want to go, fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. The feedback we have from our community is, I will go faster and further with the community that I get at Core Confidence.
That's some feedback. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and
what a beautiful thing to hear.
It is. And one of the structures that we have in place because this work is quite deep and it is unpacking stuff that's been laid down over decades, when people come into our program, they get not just one sit through the live program of 10 weeks, but they get to go through it twice. So in any one cohort, we've got women who are sitting it for the second time and people who are in the first. And they're holding each other, right? They're seeing the role modelling of someone who is in their second iteration, and now they're going so much deeper and they're holding it in their body. And what we know is that this absolutely rock solid connection to who I am and that core confidence means I'm just not, it doesn't mean I never feel self-doubt, but it means I'm not rocked by what goes on externally the way I was previously. And so I think it's by design, we have layers of community, layers of connection, layers of interaction that are different to what you get in most programs. And then we have community masterminds for people to keep them checking in, coming back, talking about their experiences, having ongoing relationships and network across the whole community. So it's something that we're conscious of and consciously co-creating with them all the time.
Let's say that I'm a friend. Let's say that I've got a friend who is a woman, in that realm, 25 to 30, who's starting to face these barriers, and I'm trying to help them with any area of confidence. What's some kind of, are there a few tips or a few, I guess, practical things that that anyone could help anyone with to give this person or whoever it is in their life support or help or anything like that?
Look, there's lots of things. Anyone who's kind of interested and curious can ask good questions, can help kind of tease out for people what might be going on. One of our big philosophies, and something we talk about pretty much every week it doesn't matter what forum or what event we're in, is get clear. So clarity is incredibly important and harder to do than you'd think, because when I get clear, I have to potentially leave some options. I have to put something out there that I may or may not achieve in terms of a goal or something I'd like to go after. And the other thing is to face fear and to actually acknowledge and unpack and start to understand those fears that sit below the surface. So really, asking good questions, letting people start to explore and understand. One of the big philosophies of our work is the act of confidence comes before the feeling of confidence. So encouraging them to take action before they're 100% ready. As an experiment, let's just see what happens here. If you do go and ask that question, if you do go and contribute in this way, just getting some feedback is incredibly valuable. So encouraging people to do things. I mean, the book is very much structured around the 10 building blocks of confidence, and each chapter has 4 or 5 self-coaching questions. So it naturally has pieces in it that, are the kind of grassroots of the work that we do in terms of supporting women to start to think about this differently. I have to say we've had quite a few men read the book as well, and we've had very good feedback that all the exercises apply to them as well. Our orientation is towards women, our stories is about women, but these are things that, a lot of us as humans grapple with. I think the other thing I'd say is it's not just women in that early stage. The thing we've been delving into recently, we've done a lot more work around, is mid to late 40s into early 50s and the menopause kind of situation as well, that seems to really rock and undermine women's confidence in quite a profound way. And so we're very interested in supporting and working with that, and we're doing some particular work around that at the moment. So I think there can be multiple points at different life stages. Obviously there's the one of stepping out for parental leave, return to work, caring for parents. Like, there's all sorts of different things that can undermine workplace continuity, and when we don't have workplace continuity, that can often undermine confidence. So I think these are things for organisations to be conscious of, and for us to be supporting women to think about, so that they're potentially more proactive in the way they engage around these different changes and stages.
And for an organisation to be aware of with these kind of things, are there any kind of easy steps or practical processes to follow, apart from the obvious hire, fixed diversity issues internally immediately? But are there more things that organisations could be doing? I'm just thinking, even from a small business perspective, I'm thinking things that I could roll out with Circle Group. What could we be looking for to become better and more aware of these kind of things as we grow?
Look, I think consciousness of leaders is a huge piece here. I know you do some work around this, and it's part of your philosophy and the way you run your organisation is become more aware, become curious, dig into this, look at your own stats, look at what's going on in your organisation. Is there a gender pay gap? What might be causing that? Is it easier for men to progress in your organisation than women? What might be causing that? Talk to the women themselves, get them to share some of what's going on for them, what their perception is, because often women perceive, the roles this difficult, this hard, that sort of thing, and they perceive their ability here. And yet we find that, a manager will say, well, actually, no, she's more like this and the role's like this, and it's much closer than people imagine. So often it's ideas in our heads that aren't that helpful. And we find when leaders are willing to get involved, coach, ask questions. In fact, it's one of the one of the ways that people come into our program is leaders identify women who are talented, high performing, doing great work, but they're not backing themselves. And they can see it's really just a small piece relatively that's missing, but it's a vital piece. And when they come into our program and they gain all of the insights, the strategies, the ways in which they can confidently ask for what they want, they can back themselves, they can ask that question, they can give that opinion, they can challenge that. That's worth, making sure that women do get the support in that way. So I think there's lots of ways organisations can. I think one of the things is to have it as a important piece that is being attended to at a senior leadership level, whether that's board, exco, or just the owners and founders. It's one of your agenda items for your board meetings. It's one of the things that we're constantly looking at, analysing, thinking about how do we foster more equity. And look, it's tough for small organisations. I was talking to someone the other day, very interesting. They do a lot of research, and the data shifts very quickly when you're in a small organisation, because you can have senior people who quite often are men, and that skews your whole gender pay gap data. So you need to think strategically about who you're employing at what level and who are you promoting and why.
I do think the data is important from a guideline perspective, but I do think it is potentially even a dangerous pursuit to some degree, because we need to be very careful about how we approach. Like it's a multifaceted issue, as we've established, and data is a very simple measurement. And so if we need to get there, but in such ways, looking at I think building the solutions in a strategically, and having reporting and measurements that consider such things is important, and because we're also not going to be fixing the problems if we're looking at the wrong data. So we need to cover that part off. Do you think there's different ways or different data sets that we could be looking at? Like, is there or how it's reported could be improved or measured in any way there?
Look, I think you're absolutely right that we can kind of make stats say whatever we want and move things around, and I think Wajia, the intention here and the overriding piece is useful and interesting, and even if it just stimulates organisations to think a little bit differently about some of these things, then it's serving a good purpose. But relying purely on the data and not seeing this as a whole of organisational shift that needs to happen, and that we all have a stake in it, and it's important to all of us, and that the way in which we engage with other organisations and talking to them about it, and seeing whether it's clients or we're a provider of services, that sort of thing, having good quality conversations about the ways in which we're putting in place structures and support mechanisms and initiatives and milestones, and we're reporting on those, is just as important as the data itself. Because what we've found in organisations is people actually aren't really angry if they work for an organisation that doesn't necessarily meet the kind of ideal, if they're well communicated with. So if it's explained to me, if people go to the trouble to unpack, what this means, why it's sitting there, what we're going to do about it, the ways in which we think this is applicable or maybe not, and has good quality conversations, then that's really the big job here. It's how do we communicate internally and externally, given the data is X.
Context. I love it. It's such a simple thing. Communicate, but it's so often forgotten. I'd like to divert a little bit more into the more holistic topics, which we like to do on the podcast, and understand, I suppose, behind some of the incredible work that you're doing and the change that you're looking to make in the world is objectively good. What does good mean to you, though?
I thought that was a really challenging question, actually, because there are so many ways you could go with this, and I ended up with three things that I thought were kind of important. And look, I think there's a bit of a paradox here. I think sometimes the striving towards good, the engagement with the idea of good can cloud what's going on underneath. I think when I think about good, I'm thinking about how do we act with integrity? How are we transparent about what's really going on? How do we have a clear intention and communicate that? And personally, how do I have the capacity to hold and love whatever I encounter without judgment or blaming or shaming? How do I, because I know from an energetic point of view, the frequency that I have in the world is part of the whole. And if I'm engaging in the very thing that so often drives what's going on in the battle of the sexes or gender wars or whatever we want to call it, I'm actually going to be contributing to the problem, not the solution. So one of the lovely things that Kate and I share is we're both trained systemic practitioners, which means we've done a huge amount of work to understand family and organisational systems. And one of the beautiful principles of systemic work is that everything is there for a reason. And so we understand that we need to honour what exists now. We understand that trying to shame or blame others into doing something different doesn't work. It just makes them defensive. So we need to find ways to include them, to bring them along, to help them see something that potentially they can't see, and respect that, they have loyalties and they have biases for reasons that go back a long way too. And slamming and judging them for that is not helpful. So when I think about good, I think about the inner journey, my inner journey, and the inner journey we facilitate for all our clients, who are mainly female, but we certainly do some culture and leadership work with all genders. So how do we support that so that people can be connected to a higher purpose, so they can have a sense of good they're contributing? And I think for me, one of my most important philosophies or principles is oneness. So that's that piece where whatever's showing up externally, whatever's available to me, is actually for me to work on, to integrate it and to learn from, which means there's not really anything bad out there. It's just an opportunity for me to learn and grow and expand. And that may be a little bit naive, but I've found that's held me in good stead over many years in all sorts of situations, personal and professional.
It's such a funny thing, and such a privilege to hear these answers and the context that you give, and from my perspective, I get to sit here and hear different thought processes and different kind of guiding lights for people's lives, which is such an important thing to consider. I am particularly interested in the energy piece that you were talking about there. You mentioned energetically you're drawn. You got to be aware of that. What does energy mean to you?
So I think the way that I hold a sense of energy as a human experience is tapping into something spiritual. People would call it, the divine. Some people would call it God. Some people would call it the universe. But it's an energetic connection that we all share. In our humanness, we all know it. We all can feel it when we're in the presence of someone who has that. It is really important. It's important to Kate and I. We meditate almost every day together in our business. And one of the reasons for that is to have that energetic connection, to hold that container, to have that integrity of the way we operate in the world and what we bring to our clients, to our community. So we take that seriously, and also we love to have fun and be light with it. And you come to any of our sessions, there'll be a presencing moment, and we'll say to people, if this is not your thing, you don't like meditation, you don't like this sort of thing, that's okay. Just close your eyes for 60 seconds and just have a little breather for the day. So I think it's really important to often hold these things, even though I know the depth of it and we know the depth and how incredibly integral it is to us, to actually be able to hold it lightly so that it's accessible to people wherever they're at whatever stage and interest level they have in these things.
The meditation piece I find very interesting, and the energy movement. It's interesting. I've recently, I shouldn't say recently, the next evolution of Circle Group, I should say, is of Chasing Good. Sorry, is to explore the kind of the deeper lessons and philosophies that we've undertaken as a society over the over history, and some of those lessons, what it means to be good, not just from in modern days context, but also in the across different societies, across different cultures and religions, and the spirituality piece is something that has taken my life in a very, very interesting direction, and it's something that I've found to be probably one of the most influential, like positively influential practices that I've started over the last couple of years, or remained consistent with over the last couple of years. And it is funny when I understand what you're saying completely, but with this depth of energy that you kind of gravitate towards, and you spend the time, you're just giving yourself the space to feel the feelings, or to observe the driving emotions, or the pull, and whichever way it is a incredible practice, and one that I have no doubt does incredible things for both you and Kate. I'm not surprised that your business and the work that you're doing is making the impact that it is when you're following those kind of principles. Look, I just want to say, Fiona, everything that you are doing is so incredibly important. It's so incredibly appreciated that you are doing what you're doing. I'm sure that it is, and I get to say this quite a lot, it is hard to quantify just how much of an impact that you'll make, because you'll never know the generational impact that you make when it comes to these kind of lessons that you get to teach, that people get to pass on down to their kids and their kids. It's a stone in the middle of a very significant pond. So thank you for all that you do, and to Kate as well for all that that she has done with you. Thank you for joining me on Chasing Good here today. It has been an absolute privilege to chat and to hear more of your story. I look forward to continuing to keep in touch and work together where we can. And thank you again.
Thanks, Michael. It's just been a delight to share some of those things with you, and thank you for holding the conversation so beautifully and warmly. I really appreciate that.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for listening to Chasing Good, a Circle Group podcast. Our mission is to shift the world closer to kindness, sustainability, awareness, and action. We hope you enjoyed. Until next time.